These are media planning and buying tools, algorithmic media planning and buying tools, driven by AI. Combining the two, give me a campaign. We're now much more advisors, we're sort of purveyors of.
Destacado líder en producción de contenido digital creativo de soluciones y medios digitales para agencias y profesionales del marketing con visión a futuro. A lo largo de su reconocible trayectoria se ha encargado de unificar los servicios de contenido, datos, medios digitales y tecnología. Es fundador del mayor grupo de publicidad y relaciones públicas del mundo que se mantiene siempre a la vanguardia incorporando inteligencia artificial. Él es Sir Martin Sorrell, fundador y presidente ejecutivo de S4 Capital.
And I'm very happy to see you in Mexico.
Good to be here.
What are your favorite places? But you've been in Mexico several times.
Many times, many times. I used to come here, I would say, at least, once every year, maybe once every 2 years at WPP. And here, I come here probably once every 2 years, something like that.
And now with S4 Capital?
Yeah, we have about 500 people here. We have about 3,000 out of 7,000 actually in South America. We have about 500 in Mexico City, about 500 in Bogota, about 1,500 in Sao Paulo and San Carlos, which is the university town in Brazil, and then about 850, I think it is, in Buenos Aires. So Latin America for us is important. South America is important for us from a client point of view, but also from a hub point of view, because we're doing a lot of work. Somewhat controversially in our industry, I do think South America is a very, very good and probably an underestimated region in our industry.
I agree.
The mucky mucks in New York and London would think that they are the Premier League, and I don't think they are quite alone in the Premier League. They might be in the Premier League, but some of the work that's coming out of South America and the technical capability, the technological capability, which with the growth of things like AI and quantum is going to become even more important, mean that this region, and because it's a young region as well, youthful population, good birth rate, so it's likely to be an engine of growth. And maybe we'll get into this, no doubt, as we talk. But as the world becomes more fragmented and clients are picking out growth areas, what's interesting, if you look at the holding companies' quarterly reports, so they've all pretty much reported, I think, except Dentsu. The only region in the world where they are all growing, even the ones that are having a really stinker of a time, like a WPP or a Dentsu or an IPG, the one region of the world where they're growing, it tends to be Latin America.
Yeah.
The inflation makes it a little bit easier, because there's a bit more inflation here. Maybe there's a little bit more wiggle room. But I think it's also to do with the fact, the nature of the population, the nature of consumption.
And it reflects where brands are at those specific countries.
Yes, but I think it's going to become even more important.
Well, we know in history when there's pressure, especially from spending, consumer spending, when inflation is an issue, there's always a push for efficiency. Mm-hmm. That's always happening.
Well, it's going to get tougher and tougher. I mean, it's just top of my mind. When I got into the hotel, I flipped on CNBC. Palantir reported their results. I think they did $1 billion in the quarter, and they talked about increasing their revenues tenfold over the next, I think it was 10 years or whatever it was, but reducing the number of people.
Yes.
From 33,100, I think it was, to 2,500, if I remember the numbers. So and that's in the and actually, Alex Karp, who's one of the co-founders, is talking about negotiating with the unions or talking to the unions about how this all works out. It's going to be really interesting to see whether you see a tenfold increase in revenue, and they're going to reduce the number of people in the business. In our business, in our industry, staff costs, personnel costs to revenue is around 65%. We had a board meeting in New York last week. One of our non-executive directors said that she thought the staff cost to revenue ratios in our industry, and she went on to Grok, actually, and Grok said it's going to be reduced to 50%.
Well, when you look at AI, I think there's another challenge. in the near horizon. And what I would say, Sir Martin, is that there's also an incentive from these AI companies to also take over, from a business perspective, other areas. And I guess that's where I would like to, start getting down to details here. When you look at what OpenAI or Google or even Adobe, which I know you have a great partnership with, do you think they're going to start offering marketing as a service and start competing with brands and agencies to become part of our ecosystem? Because it seems like they're moving nearer and nearer. If you look at,
I've always said, I used to say when I was at WPP, I didn't coin the phrase. It was a woman who worked with me as she went off to Harvard Business School. She gave me the phrase frenemy. So I would say we're now much more advisors. We're sort of purveyors we're justifiers of their activities. I mean, let's just spend a minute on the market structure. You mentioned Adobe. Put that to one side for a minute, because Adobe provides software in our industry slightly different. So I don't think they will go direct. They can go direct in terms of provision of their software,
of their tools.
But just move that to one side for a minute. It's $1 trillion industry last year, about 700 billion in digital, which is growing at 10 or 15%. You saw the Meta results for Q2. They're growing at 20%. Google in the 10 to 15% range. So these platforms, that 700 billion is growing at 10, 15, 20%. Maybe stimulated a bit by AI, maybe not, because we're still in the foothills of that. The other 300 billion is in traditional media, which a company like Televisa, is.
Yeah, linear.
We're in Brazil, they're finding it, and obviously they've had to restructure and reposition themselves to take care of it. So very different. And if you don't have live sports, you're going down by, that traditional 300 billion by 10 to 15% a year. You have live sports, you may be down 0 to 5%.
Yeah.
So, and that if you look at that $1 trillion, Google is responsible for about 250 billion last year. So 25% share, Meta 150, 15 share, Amazon 60, TikTok outside China 40. Add those four up, they're half the market, and 5/7 of that 700 billion. So they're more than 70% in 4 platforms. If you throw in mainland China, which is excluded from that $1 trillion, Alibaba and Tencent, there are 6 platforms that really are the drivers. You then drop down, Microsoft's probably about 19 billion of ad spending. Apple maybe about 11 or 12. Snap's about 5.5, 6. Pinterest about 4. Twitter, or now X, used to be 5, probably more like 2 now.
More like 2, probably.
So the focus is in those 6 platforms, 3 Western, 3 Eastern. That's the guts. They're all, the Mag 7, so throw in Microsoft, Apple, NVIDIA, Adobe, Oracle, Salesforce. The MAGA 7, as we now call it, or the Mag 7, is spending about $500 billion a year on AI infrastructure. In fact, in Q2, I think Google said they're going up from 75 to 85 billion. I think Meta is still around 75 billion. Amazon's going up from 100 billion to 135.
With huge, there's a report yesterday with huge, I'm sure you saw it, huge strains in the Wall Street Journal, huge strains to the cash flow of these companies, which is...
Well, yes, but the market is rewarding them. I mean, six months, a year ago, they would say, is this capital expenditure
be worth it or not?
Comes out, Manos comes out in China,
everybody spoke.
Are they overspending? But now they see the revenue growth they're still getting. I mean, it's early days, and Meta gets a pass. Meta's share price has gone... When Zuckerberg initiated the year of efficiency, which has now become the decade of efficiency, I guess, Meta's share price was languishing at 80 or 90. It's now about 750. And one analyst put it up to 800, a target price of 800 last week. So that's in 2 years, 2.5 years.
So you don't see
I see increasing domination of those 6. Now, we have to get closer to those platforms. Now, you said Mark Zuckerberg just before Cannes, right? Just before voting Cannes, he came out and said, give me your credit card. I can give you 4,000 creative alternatives. That's going to happen. It's already happening. Meta has Advantage Plus. Google, I'm here in Mexico here. We're going to do a big event on AI with Google tomorrow. Google has PMax, Performance Max.
Yep.
These are media planning and buying tools, algorithmic media planning and buying tools, driven by AI. It's a short step before linking that to content creation. Text to video, text to audio, combining the two. Give me a campaign, give me content campaign, and give me the planning and buying. But even Google only has 25% of the market, or 1/3 of the digital market. There's another 2/3 or another half of the market, or 3/4 of the market that have. In Meta's case, it's all very well Mark Zuckerberg saying that, but he has a 15 share at the moment. Probably going to go up to about 20 in the next couple of years because he is growing faster as a result of his AI focus. What I'm saying is we have to be the purveyor of what they are doing. We have to judge. Clients will say to us, the Google algorithm, the Meta algorithm, the Amazon algorithm, the ByteDance algorithm, Alibaba, Tencent algorithms, are they right? So that we will be the advisor to the client. So that's
maybe the brands will not want to spend all their money, time, and put so much power into these platforms.
Oh, I disagree with that. The amounts of money that they are spending on AI, which I just said, $500 billion a year.
No, I'm referring to the brands. Do you think brands will want to give so much power to these 6?
They have no choice. I mean, the best reach, the best frequency, the best penetration, using first-party data and signals from those platforms, the best results will come from using those platforms. I mean, there will be other players. Musk is obviously, with Grok and everything else, is going to be a player. Obviously, Microsoft has its involvement through OpenAI. We're involved in our venture fund with Runway. We made an investment in Runway. Minimax, which is the Runway equivalent in China, is probably going to go public. The Wall Street Journal had an article on it shortly in Hong Kong. So these LLMs and these platforms are becoming more and more significant. There are alternatives like Perplexity and Anthropic and everything else, Mistral and everything. But essentially, Mistral has got a stake with Microsoft. Essentially, those companies I mentioned, the big 6 or 3 Western, 3 Eastern platforms, plus Apple, plus Nvidia, plus Microsoft, plus Adobe, plus Oracle, plus Salesforce are really...
Plus OpenAI.
Take Adobe. You mentioned Adobe. It's very interesting. Adobe's got competition coming at it from...
Everywhere,
in terms of from
Canva, the Australian.
And it's got competition coming from Runway. The guy, I think I'm right in saying that Cristobal, the founder of Runway, wrote his PhD thesis on text to video. And Adobe, I think, saw that. I think this story is true, and said to him when he graduated or got his PhD, why don't you come to Adobe and put it into place? And he said, no, I want to build my own platform. And when we were doing our due diligence on our investment in Runway just recently in the last round, I asked Cristobal, what's your exit? Because you always do that with your venture capital. And I said, is it, to be bought by Adobe? He said, no, we're going to buy Adobe. so you see, Figma, the one that's just gone public, right?
It's amazing.
Company that Adobe tried to buy.
When you look at the number of companies that are actually shying away from the previous, top players and saying, I have my own game.
Yeah, but, ultimately, that doesn't mean that these platforms are so powerful. I mean, this is the problem the governments have, right? The governments are saying they're too powerful. The problem is the regulators can't keep up with them because they're moving at light speed and, they can never the regulators will never, even in the US, be able to keep up with them. If they break them up and make them weaker as a result, it's a real problem from a defense point of view. I mean, I always quote this situation. I mean, remember President Xi, when he got into that fracas with Jack Ma, when Ant Financial was going public and he made those comments about the regulator and he was shunned. He now seems to be back in the fold again, but he was shunned. President Xi said he was going to cut Alibaba, or his direct report said they were going to cut Alibaba up into 8 pieces or 10 pieces. It hasn't happened. Why hasn't it happened? I think it's partly, if not wholly, due to the fact they understand having strong tech companies
is part of
defense point of view, maybe even offensive point of view. We've seen that with Musk. We've seen that with Palantir. We've seen how important they are to the safety and security of the nation state.
Do you think that the strategy from the brand's perspective is going to align more and more to what you have built with S4 Capital, with BMW, with the marketing engine, where the brand is going to hire an agency and maybe that team can be in or not inside the company? 3 models. There's the outsource model to the agency, the embedded model where we put people into the client, and then the in-house model. We're the subject of a Harvard Business School case study in media planning and buying for T-Mobile and Sprint. So we're not frightened to do ourselves out of a job. The reason we're not is that there are 2 things that you need if you in-house or you embed. And that is, one is keeping up to date with technology because it's moving so quickly. And if you're just working in one firm, it tends to be rather narrow in terms of vertical. And the other thing is that people tend to shift inside client organizations more significantly to other jobs. So there's always a personnel need. So there are 2 areas of after-sales service if you go in-house. One is keeping up to date in technology. One is keeping the best people in place or replacing the good people with other good people in order to maintain the momentum. So I think in-housing doesn't necessarily do you out. Going back to S4 and Monks, our operating brand, we're digital only, so we're operating in that 700 billion that is growing at 10 or 15%. We're data driven, which 6 years ago it sounded pretty smart. Today in an AI age, it's super smart. We go to market as faster, better, cheaper, and more because of AI, because we can do more with AI. That's even more relevant today in that slower growth world where inflation is higher and interest rates are higher. And lastly, a unitary structure. You've seen the holding companies wrestling with their multi-brand structures. WPP's dire position at the minute is in part driven by the fact that they haven't managed to unify the business as much as maybe Publicis have managed to do, who went through a difficult period doing it, but have now come out of the end. Do you think agencies have lost, in a way, the trust of brands in terms of data and strategy?
No, I don't think they've lost. I don't think they've lost the. I think at the end of the day, if you compare and contrast Publicis, for example, to WPP, so Publicis, if I look at the 6 holding companies, I would say 2, maybe 3 are doing well or better. Publicis is doing super well. Omnicom in the last couple of quarters actually has been flat on the top line, and its merger with IPG is really a cost-driven merger. I mean, the synergies there are very significant. They started with 127,000 people. My guess is they'll be at 110,000 people.
But that goes back to your point about efficiencies.
Well, in a way, yes, but it's a short-term strategy. It's not a long-term strategy. It's no good. It's like 2 drunks being propped up by the lamppost. The third one that's doing okay is Havas, 2% growth, but these are pretty tough growth. Then WPP, IPG now merging into or trying to merge into Omnicom, and Dentsu are the ones that are struggling. So if I look at that, what is the reason that Publicis is doing better? Better strategy around data and digital, better leadership. Arthur Sadoun and Maurice Levy in the background, good leadership. And the others are floundering. So I think it just tells you that there was a need to get better strategy and leadership into those companies. Now, as far as I'm concerned, and as far as we're concerned, S4 and Monks is really trying to align ourselves increasingly with those platforms that are successful and that we think are going to be successful in the future. And by the way, if you're right, the inference of your questions, that you think others will emerge, making sure that we're properly aligned with them. The great skill that monks have is around technology, deep understanding of technology. You wouldn't have a joint venture with NVIDIA, AWS, and Adobe in outside broadcasting, for example, unless you had deep technical knowledge. And we're working closely with the traditional broadcasters who, in reducing the cost of outside broadcasting, instead of buying a truck for $10 million and amortizing it for over 5 years at $2 million a year, you put in an AI cloud-driven execution, which costs $200,000. So very significant cost reductions.
So it seems like the speed in which Monks is going to align itself with tech, with these potential new platforms, is one of the strategies that would drive growth and actual brand adoption.
Yes, I think that's right. I mean, in summary, we are validators. It's ironic, a little bit ironic. We built on two companies, Media Monks and Mighty Hive. Mighty Hive started in San Francisco as a sort of Google reseller, if you like, a validator of Google technology and Alphabet technology. And in a way, we're sort of reverting back to that. But coming to the heart of it, no client today would give Rupert Murdoch, with all due respect to Rupert Murdoch, here's 100% of my media budget, go spend it for me. They would want a validator like us to say, we think, what Rupert is suggesting, or his people are suggesting, is a good idea. Same thing applies to Alphabet with Performance Max or Meta with Advantage Plus. Clients will want validation of what the algorithm is telling.
And that was my point. I don't think brands want to cede total control to 6 platforms. They want somebody to work with and to build alongside. Because in the end, there's a lot of personal connections where the CMO wants a specific vision. It's much more than just media planning.
But but in this world where algorithms are going to become more important, I mean, it is a bit ridiculous that we're $1 trillion industry, which sounds big, but then you compare it to the investment industry. BlackRock or Blackstone deals with 13 trillion or whatever it is that Blackstone or BlackRock manages. It's huge amounts, and Blackstone as well. And I remember Erwin Gottlieb, who used to run Group M when I was running WPP, used to call media planning and buying media investment management. And I always thought that was a sharp thing to say, and he's right. Because when you think about that $1 trillion, let's say it was one client, it's where should I spend that $1 trillion, to your point, in the most effective way? Which platforms, which media?
It would end up in the top 6.
So the algorithms spit out the answer. You need a validator working closely with the platforms, not as a, more friendly than enemy. So the frenemy is more friend than enemy now, working very closely. But, WPP, for example, have pursued a strategy, I think ill-advisedly, in believing that they can develop software to compete with Adobe. I mean, they're trying to, WPP Open, in part, is about creating software. I think Mark Reed, before he resigned, retired, or whatever, we used to show clients on his computer. He used to say, give me, a prompt for an ad. I'll give you an ad. And then was talking about, making it into a SaaS model. Agents are not going to be able to do that. You can't compete against companies that are piling, $500 billion, each year.
And I don't know you want to do that, because that's fine.
You want to align yourself with them, work with them to develop better solutions and more trusted solutions for clients. And in a world where people are using first-party data and the signals from those platforms increasingly and intensively, differentiating it, the algorithms will spit out conclusions. The humans will evaluate those conclusions. And I remember James Quincy at Coca-Cola saying, if everybody's doing personalized advertising, how do you distinguish? We're getting bombarded with even more ads. How do you distinguish? That's the key, is you distinguish by being even more creative in your approach. So in a way, there'll be a premium, in my view, on fewer humans. For example, in media planning and buying, there won't be 250,000 people in our industry in 3 or 4 years' time. It'll be much less people, but the outputs that we will be evaluating will be really superb. Today, in many media planning and buying operations, which are the core, the guts of the holding companies, why does Publicis do better? It's got a better media planning and buying operation. Why does Omnicom do a little bit better than the others? The same reason. And why did they get together with IPG? Make media brands great again. So what you have to do is to focus on this and develop it over time and get better people, fewer people, better people focusing on these results as they are propagated by the algorithms.
To your point, I can't stop thinking about Sharpie pens, and this is going to sound funny, but I've never seen agencies buy Sharpie pen factories and decide they want to start doing their own Sharpie pens better than Sharpie pens. They want to keep buying Sharpie pens and using them. And in a way, I think that's true for AI. I don't think that companies should be competing in creating their own AI engines, but I think they should be finding a way to better use them. And that's true across all industries. But that also makes me think what's happening with legacy agencies, which I've heard your speeches in Canada. This is not the first time we speak, and we've talked about how agencies have grown through creativity. And I wonder that if legacy agencies did it that way right now, they need to grow a little bit more through a new business model.
Everybody looks back to Don Draper and Mad Men,
but that doesn't happen anymore.
And lasts off those days, the days of David Ogilvy and Raymond Rubicam, etc. That's right, and that's right. Yeah, those romantic days. Well, look, creativity is just as important as it ever has been, but alongside it, there's a thing called data. I remember the number of luminaries in the business. We don't need data because they like clients to operate with their gut and do things. It doesn't work that way anymore, right? Data actually improves insight. It doesn't destroy insight. It doesn't make creativity worse. It makes it better by focusing it, right? And then there's technology, right, which is enabling us to do things. Our industry is being affected, we think, in 5 ways: visualization and copywriting, collapsing the time that it takes to produce a film, and it's the cost. Taking the cost down. We've got one example at the minute: $2.5 million, taking 4 months, collapses down to $500,000 in a couple of weeks. Which would you rather have? And the models that produces, like a Runway, like a Minimax, like a Luma, are getting better and better in real time. Yeah. When I showed you the work, we'll show it tomorrow in our presentations around with Google. If I showed you the work we did for Puma 2 or 3 months ago, and compare it to what we're doing today for GM and others, it's extraordinary change literally in a couple of months. And in a couple of months' time, we show Will Smith eating a spaghetti over years. So this is moving at light speed. So visualization and copywriting, personalization at scale. The Netflix model on steroids using first-party data and the signals from the platform. Media planning and buying, we covered. General efficiency, I mentioned in the case of outside broadcasting. And finally, democratizing knowledge. Taking out layers in organizations. Jensen Huang has 51 direct reports. How does he do it? By spreading knowledge inside the organization. From your activities that people build positions inside companies by controlling information. If information is disseminated across the organization, nobody can exert power over a silo or a segment of that organization by controlling information. It's available to everybody. And that defenestrates and flattens the organization, makes it more efficient. Going back to what I mentioned, Alex Karp and Palantir, how's he going to do that? If if I remember the numbers right, it was 3,100 going down to 2,500. How does he manage to do that? By making information available to everybody. Yes, absolutely.
Destroying silos, no silo.
Absolutely. That's a huge change in my view. I actually think that is the biggest power of AI, is its ability to disseminate information inside businesses and unify them. If I was to ever write a book, which I never will, on our industry, the biggest problem on the agency side and the client side, or the other way around, client and agency, is politics with a small p. The inability of people, people at the top of the organization trying to get things done and people subverting that purpose. What I've seen over the course of my career, both client and agency, is unbelievable.
To their own detriment, many times.
Yeah, self-defeating. Huge self-defeating issues. I mean, you see it in politics.
Yeah.
Right?
Which doesn't surprise, but you would assume that the capitalist element of a client would be enough to...
If it overcomes financial motivation. People think that people are motivated. How often do I hear, that incentive systems have to be designed, very closely to objectives? True, I agree with it 100%. But it's not sufficient. Personal ego, status, position, authority, autonomy, independence. You were on the Melly boat.
Yeah, I was.
You remember, it was somebody, we won't say who had sold his agency and still thought he was running it.
No, and I think that when you look at the future of our industry, there's an incentive to create more content. And that means that better content will actually be a little bit more apparent than it is right now, I would guess. But there's also going to be much more agencies because it's much easier to create them. And I think that's good in a way, but they'll probably be smaller and then competition will change. I think there's a shift.
Polarization, I think, will be very much like the investment banking industry. You have your Goldman, you have your JP Morgan, you have your Morgan Stanley at one end, you have your Evercore. Evercore just bought Roby Warshaw in the UK as a boutique in the UK. So you have Evercore, you have Taubman, PJT,
and all the family offices and
even the smaller scale family offices. But you'll have polarization. I think the middle will be the toughest place to be. So you have the bigger and you have the small.
Sir Martin, I'm pleased to spend some time. It's been amazing.
Good.
Thank you very much. Welcome to Mexico. I hope you're here. Come back soon.
Well, good. Delighted to be here, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very much.